In 2008, in response to the U.S. financial system crisis, the U.S. government spent $700 billion on the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act. Despite this, the world sank into a deep recession. For the next decade, GDP remained low and public fear lingered. Would the situation continue to worsen? No clear end to the recession could be seen. Fortunately, the global economy did not plunge into a depression as analysts feared they might. A prolonged recession has afflicted the world from 2008 until now in 2022. A decade ago, the majority of Generation Y, at the time young graduates, were unable to find well-paid jobs in their chosen fields. Instead, they elected to continue their education, looking to better their position with a more specialized degree. The wisdom of the time advocated pursuit of more education as a tool to achieve one's aspirations. However, that promise came with a downside. The resulting student loan debt dragged down their Generation Y's performance and quality of life relative to that of their parents. The debt will have this effect until the loans are paid off, sometimes as long as 25 years from the date of graduation. By now, these young professionals have found job stability, but their lives were significantly affected by the amount of debt they carried. Many took on careers outside their original field of study in order to pay off the loans. Affected by rising unemployment levels and debt, fewer Generation Yers can afford to buy their own homes and have significantly lower percentage of discretionary income than their parents did at that age. This has led to an increased focus on maximizing the quality of one's living through a full individual life before changing focus to raising a family. This is reflected in the mantra, the 30s are the new 20s. This is reflected in that the average age at which U.S. women have their first child has been pushed from 25 in 2012 to 31 in 2022. Lower overall income has also resulted in families consciously deciding to have fewer children than they would in 2012. Topping the recession is a deep mistrust of the digital financial system. There is an underlying perception that digital connectedness has led to an increased instability within global markets. People fear how one negative event might have unforeseen effects throughout the world's economy. This fear of how interconnected the world's finances are has fueled an emotional feeling that a depression could be looming around every corner. Outlooks are uncertain and cynical with small bursts of hope, but no concept of a systematic solution to the recession or the fear itself. There is no salve. In recognition of the dire financial situation and swiftly widening gap between the rich and the poor, the U.S. government has taken action more dramatic than it has in the last century, hearkening to Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal programs designed to deal with the Great Depression of the 1930s. The government has worked to improve public welfare through spending on grand-scale public services and infrastructures, including new clean energy programs and comprehensive public transportation. As an economic spritz rather than a trickle-down, this strategy has helped to ease the effect of the recession on the middle and lower economic tiers by creating jobs and improving social welfare. The government has taken on this role of redistributing wealth with strong public approval due to a recognition of the necessity of these projects. A moderate increase in taxes has assisted with this redistribution of wealth, while the government has contributed by trimming some of its excess fat. To fund these extensive projects, the government has been methodically defunding and deregulating public establishments, such as universities, museums, and grant-funded research. Universities and museums have had to seek private assistance in order to keep their doors open. As private interests started to fill this monetary void, it was inevitable to see corporate agendas and profitability bias reflected in the public role of these establishments provided. As a result, bias as well as advertisements fill the sphere of free content. Unbiased information is, of course, available for those willing to pay. The acceptance of free information has increased as people have become accustomed to it and increasingly find themselves lacking the funds to pay for it. The notion of corporate responsibility has been extended through this new environment of merged public and private interest. Corporate responsibility now includes the concept of creating public good to the mutual benefit of the public and the organization. In the eye of the public, corporations vacillate between good and bad. This is the pain that comes with traditional corporate business models built on profit maximizations for a select set of stakeholders. These stakeholders are usually not perceived to include the public. Now the mental model of who constitutes a stakeholder is changing. Corporations are starting to define their stakeholders more broadly. With this, the public has become hyper-vigilant and critical, but also highly appreciative of the role that private interests play in the public good. Regardless of shrinking crude oil supplies, global demand for energy has continued to increase. This has been due to rising industrialization of third world countries and growing global middle class, despite a widening gap in developed nations. In the U.S., gas prices approached records high of $8 a gallon. Fuel and transportation costs have compounded the prices of everyday items, driving efficiencies to dense areas and costs to sparsely populated areas. Cities have expanded, swallowing up the suburbs, and costs of everyday items have increased by 112% from 2012 prices. Extraneous travel has become difficult for Americans to afford or justify. After work, people have stopped traveling far from home. This has fueled migration to urban areas as people want to live closer to work. Government spending on revitalized public transportation has made it easy for some urban Americans to wean themselves off of driving their own car. However, some of these highly efficient mass transit systems were quickly privatized as the government lacked funds to keep them running. Corporate agendas has therefore dictated the growth of these transit systems.